Are there any tech instructions that you need to give at the top of the?
My tech instructions were mostly for the public. To members who have joined us as panelists, you do have the ability to unmute yourselves, and video is not required for this meeting.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's joining us here today. My name is Christine Coe. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the city's budget and program evaluation manager. We have a group of staff and alders who are going to walk through the city's 2023 budget. And I'm going to briefly go through the agenda and then ask all the staff panelists and alders to introduce themselves. And then we'll jump into a presentation. That will be the bulk of our time today. The first part of the presentation will be an overview of the city budget process. So we'll talk about the difference between the capital and operating budgets, our annual budget development timeline, as well as share some tips for navigating the budget website. Then we'll talk specifically about some highlights of the capital budget, followed by the operating budget, and close out by talking about how the budget impacts the average City of Madison resident in terms of property taxes and how you see this playing out in that way. We'll also have time for questions and answers. So if any residents join via the webinar link, you'll be able to raise your hand and unmute. We ask that you hold questions to the very end. And if you're just watching via live stream, we'll also share an email at the very end where you can share questions that way. So I'm going to take down my slides just for a second and ask everyone to introduce themselves. I'll call on you as we go around the room. So if you can say your name, your position, and if there's anything that you're excited about in this budget or that you're looking forward to discussing in the upcoming deliberations. I'll start by asking Dave to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is David Schmidtke. I'm the finance director for the City of Madison. I use he, him, his pronouns. Excited to be here with you today and walk through the budget with Christine, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Dave. I'll pass it to Deputy Mayor Baumel.
Hi there, my name is Christy Baumel. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for the mayor's office as a liaison to a number of things the city works on. And I always look forward to the budget because I think it's one of the very most important things that we do. And I particularly am excited about some of the investments we make in affordable housing and in climate resilience and climate action.
Thanks, Christy. Ryan, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Ryan Pennington. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a budget policy analyst in the finance department. And I'm excited. I think the education part of what the budget team does is kind of one of the more interesting things we do. So excited for these meetings.
Thanks. And moving on to our alders, Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you very much. I'm Alder Harrington McKinney, and my district is District 1, the far west side. And what I'm most excited about is this outreach to the public to have a better understanding. This educational component is exceptional, and I commend the finance department for offering this to our residents so that they have a better understanding of the budget framework.
Thanks so much, Alder Harrington McKinney. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Good afternoon. So Alder Figueroa Cole from District 10 on the west side of Madison. And there's a few things that I'm excited about, but I'm just going to narrow it down to two, which are the Parks Alive position that it has been suggested. Parks Alive was an amazing success story this summer. So I'm happy that we're actually investing on that. And super excited about putting funding on youth employment.
Thank you. And Alder Miadze.
Good evening, everybody. I am just honored that city staff is actually giving a presentation to the public, to our residents. I think this is the most critical time and a critical part of our process that the city does in order to let the residents know. And of course, this is Alder Biadze, North Side, District 18. And again, I'm honored to be here, and I'm glad that city staff is giving this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Alder Wahelier, you just joined, but we're going through a round of introductions. If you want to introduce yourself, let us know what district you represent, and if there's anything you're excited about in this budget season.
Good evening. My name is Alda Wahelier. I serve on District 7 Far West Side, and I haven't prepared anything. So I'm just curious as, the effect of some of the budget for the City of Madison. So, yeah.
Great. Well, we're happy to have you. Thank you again for joining. And for anyone who's watching on the live stream, we are going to be recording this and sharing this out. And we'll be sharing out any questions that come in as well. So I'll just jump right into our presentation. Again, we'll go through the overview of the process, the capital budget, operating budget, and how this impacts property taxes. One thing I will note is that the budget document is quite large. It's over 600 pages, and there's just no way we can cover everything in an hour and a half. So we really just are going to do a very high-level overview and want you to walk away knowing just how the budget process works and how you as a member of the public can be involved through public comment, learn some key highlights from the 2023 budget, and again, understand how the budget impacts your property taxes. So moving on. So what exactly is the budget and how is it funded? The first thing to know is that the city actually has two budgets. There's the capital budget and the operating budget. And both of these are planning documents that lay out how the city will spend money in the upcoming year to provide services to residents and advance key priorities. These plans have to be approved by the Common Council before the city is authorized to encumber or spend any money. The budget process is required by state law, and it covers spending for 1 year starting January 1st through December 31st. The capital budget includes what we call a capital improvement plan, or CIP, that has a 5-year outlook. And this is because capital projects tend to have a long time horizon, and the 5-year outlook helps plan for what some of these multi-year projects will look like over time. And the staff on this call we're all in the finance department, but developing the budget is a citywide effort that involves collaborations with every department. City staff work, department heads, managers, line staff work on developing what their agencies need, present it to the mayor's office, and work with the finance department to turn their agency requests into the executive budget that's ultimately presented to the Common Council to be reviewed, amended, and adopted. And one key factor about the operating budget is that it must be balanced, meaning that expenses cannot exceed revenue. So we can't spend more money than we have coming in. I'm looking a little more closely at the capital budget. This is what's funding infrastructure like roads, bike lanes, affordable housing developments, and other large-scale multi-year projects. This is a critical piece of a critical piece of city planning because it funds investments that ensure infrastructure is safe, that we are advancing goals on climate change and affordable housing and other key issues like transit access. So anytime you see a project like a street being reconstructed or stormwater mitigation efforts, these are things that would be funded through the capital budget. And because these are really large scale projects, most projects are funded through borrowing. So the city borrows money and pays it back over time, usually over the course of 10 years. Some projects are paid for through other sources of funding like special assessments, impact fees, or federal and state grants. So the operating budget is really the day-to-day services of the city. So this is paying for staff salaries, funding that goes directly to community-based organizations who provide services on behalf of the city, and other costs. So this is core services like trash and recycling pickup, keeping libraries open, offering park programs, having job training programs, and more. And the operating budget is primarily funded through property taxes. That covers a little over 70% of the city's revenue. Other sources include user fees, federal and state aid, and some other sources as well. So one analogy I like to use that compares the city budget to a personal budget is, a capital budget is for a household would be like buying a house or a car. For most people, you're not paying for that outright. You're borrowing money through a mortgage or a car loan. So you're taking debt to invest in a long-term asset. And then you're paying back debt over time on a regular basis through monthly installments. And at the end of the payment period, you own the asset. Similarly, there might be a multi-million-dollar road reconstruction project where we borrow money and we pay that back over time through debt service. On the operating budget side, this is more like maintaining your day-to-day household expenses with a checking account. So, your rent or mortgage payment, again, you might have a loan to pay your mortgage, but you're paying that back every month through money you have in the bank. Things like food, utilities, everyday expenses are similar to an operating budget. And if you're paying with a checking account, you need to have that money in the bank. You can't borrow and spend more than you have. And these two budgets, they're separate documents, but they do interact with each other. And in the city budget, repaying debt shows up in the operating budget under what we call debt service, and that's its own section of the budget. And again, this is similar to how your recurring payments for a mortgage show up in your checking account. In terms of the annual budget development timeline, it really is almost a year-long process to develop the budget. Each year, we start with what we call a cost to continue projection, which is how much would it cost to provide the same level of services this year as next year? So the budget team works with city agencies to, figure out what services are continuing and what those projected costs would be. Then starting in the late spring, we engage agencies to develop their own budget requests. And agencies have about 6 weeks to develop both their capital and operating budgets. And it goes through an internal proposal process where agencies present their request to the mayor's office. And there are some decision meetings, and the budget team prepares the executive budget, which is released and announced to the Common Council in September and October. And then the Common Council goes through a series of meetings in the Finance Committee and in the Common Council to amend the budget and approve the final budget. And throughout the year, there is public participation through city engagement on the budget. So, this could be staff engagement through neighborhood resource teams or other community meetings where staff are getting input from residents. We don't have a ton of budget meetings right now, and hopefully we'll have more in the future, but we're really taking inputs from a lot of the existing processes that are happening across the city, so to make sure that resident voice and neighborhood needs are included in the budget process. And of course, the members of the public can directly engage in the budget by providing public testimony. And I'll provide a calendar of dates where you can all get involved in the fall or in the next few weeks. Just to look in terms of the legislative timeline for budget hearings, both the capital and operating budget go through the same steps, which the first step is the mayor introducing the executive budget to the council. On the capital budget side, that happened in September. The operating budget was released just this Tuesday on October 11th. After the budget's introduced, it goes to the Finance Committee, where agencies will first present a briefing on their budget, and the committee will have time to ask questions of agency staff to understand their proposals. And then the Finance Committee has a week to submit requests for amendments to the budget. So this can be adding services, reducing services, or reallocating resources. This process has already been completed for the capital budget, but the operating budget amendments will happen later this month. And then the Finance Committee votes on the amendments. On the operating side, that will happen on Halloween, October 31st. After the Finance Committee has deliberated on the budget gets referred back to the Common Council for the whole council to deliberate. The council will have the opportunity to propose additional amendments, and then there will be up to three meetings in November for further deliberations and adoption. And this year, those meetings will start on November 15th. So if you're a member of the public and you want to get involved, you have several opportunities to do so. Our Finance Committee meeting on October 17th will be the first public hearing on the operating budget. On October 25th, you can speak at the Common Council on the operating budget. And on October 31st, you can speak on the budget at the Finance Committee amendment meeting. And then November 1st and November 15th are also dates where you can speak on the budget to the Common Council. So the meeting registration for the October 17th meeting is already available. If you go to cityofmadison.com/meeting registration and go to the Finance Committee, you'll be able to register for agenda item 17. You can also send a written comment at any time to Finance Committee at cityofmadison.com or allalders@cityofmadison.com. So there are a few ways to get involved. If you want to spend some time digging into the budget before making comments, you can find all of our budget materials at cityofmadison.com/budget. And I'm going to really briefly walk through our website. So if you go to cityofmadison.com/budget, you will find all of our documents. Our homepage right now has the advertisement for these public information sessions right up top. And then the capital and operating budget has the timeline, and you can go to whatever phase of the budget you're interested in. So if you wanted to learn more about the capital budget, you could see what amendments were passed at the Finance Committee meeting. You can look at the full budget, or you can look at specific sections. So if you're really interested in what's happening in fleet or IT, you can take a smaller segment of the budget. Again, since it's several hundred pages long, it's sometimes easier to break it up into the agency-specific items. And one thing I'd like to highlight on the capital budget is we have what we call our project map. And this is an interactive tool that shows where some of the major projects are happening in the city. So if you were to open this, it opens this ArcGIS map, and you'll be able to see, this doesn't include all of our projects, but it has a few projects, major items, and you can kind of scroll through the map, see what's happening in your neighborhood. And if you click on the dots and lines, you'll see what the project is, what agencies are leading it, and how much money is being invested. And there are some other interactive graphs and charts in here as well. So that's a resource I always like to point people to. So with that said, I'm going to go back to our presentation, and I'm going to provide just a brief overview of the capital budget. So for both the capital budget and operating budget highlights, we'll really focus on three things. We'll start with what are some of the key priorities for the budget. And then we'll do an overview of what we're paying for and how much does it cost, like what's the overall expenses for the budget, and what are the different revenue sources for the budget. So how are we paying for it? So on the capital budget side, there are three key priorities in the executive budget. The first being affordable housing, which increases investment in affordable housing development, as well as supports and services for residents experiencing homelessness, and consumer lending opportunities so that buying or rehabbing a house is more affordable for city residents. There's also a large body of work in terms of building a resilient city, which includes making sure that the city is prepared to withstand the impacts of climate change while also reducing the climate impacts of city operations by having a greener fleets and reducing our own carbon emissions. And finally, the last priority area is building stronger neighborhoods, which includes investing in city assets like libraries and park community centers to serve residents where they live. So for each of these priority areas, I have some of the key projects. I won't talk about all of them because we'll be sharing these slides out. But for the affordable housing area, one exciting piece of the 23 executive budget is that affordable housing development funding is increasing to $60 million over 6 years. In the 2022 budget, we had investments of $7 million a year. So the 23 budget increases the annual contribution by $3 million, which is over the course of the capital improvement plan is an $18 million increase. Additionally, it secures funding for the city's first purpose-built shelter for men experiencing homelessness. This was first introduced a few years ago, but this brings together the final pieces of funding to make construction and implementation a reality. So this includes the shelter project adds $11 million to the project, which includes $8 million from county and federal sources. For the priority of building a resilient city, there's over $22 million invested in flood mitigation work that builds on the city's efforts that have really accelerated since the 2018 flooding to address projects on key streets and drainage areas. In addition, we're leveraging $23 million to make sure that the bus fleet for the bus rapid transit is fully electric. And we're also investing in electric vehicle charging equipment for the city fleet beyond buses. So as we have more electric cars and light duty vehicles, we need to make sure that the city's electric system has the capacity to maintain and charge these vehicles. So we added a new program to be able to do this work. And this category also includes other multimodal transit options, such as planning for an Amtrak station and intercity bus terminal, as well as other public health issues like ensuring water quality by mitigating PFAS and sodium and chloride concerns in wells across the city. And in the Building Strong Neighborhoods category, a few of the major projects include a $15 million investment towards the construction of the Madison Public Library Imagination Center, as well as a $5 million expansion of the Warner Park Community Center. Many of these projects are brought about through input from neighborhood resource teams, which are neighborhood groups that include city staff whose goals are promoting racial equity and improving the quality of life for Madison residents. So we take the input of the neighborhood resource teams and use them to help prioritize some of the investments in the budget. So I talked about some of the key projects in the key priority areas, but taking a big picture view of the capital budget, the 23 capital budget invests almost $370 million. And if you look across the 6-year CIP, there's over $1.2 billion of funding for capital projects. This chart and table breaks out projects by different elements. So you can see this dark blue bar here represents funding for projects in land use and transportation. And that is typically the largest category of projects for the capital budget due to the nature of the types of things that are funded. But you can also see how much we spend on things like neighborhood and housing, green and resilient, and health and safety. And these charts are also available in our executive summaries and some of the documents we share out, and we'll make sure to include links after this presentation. So this chart here just does a quick comparison of the 23 executive budget to what was adopted last year. So the blue bars on the left show what was adopted in the 2022 budget, and the pink bar is what was included in the 23 executive budget. And so in 2023, you can see that the 2023 budget is pretty significantly higher than what was proposed last year. And this is driven by a few things. One is that there are some major new projects in 2023 that were not included in last year's capital improvement plan. Some of these major projects include the State Street Garage, which adds about $48.6 million to the capital improvement project, $23 million in federal funding for the electric BRT fleet, and the $11 million for the men's shelter, which I touched upon earlier. One other exciting project to point out is a $20 million Safe Streets for All grant. It is pending receipt of federal funds, but that's another area where we can really advance Vision Zero and safety priorities in the city if we're awarded those funds. In addition to adding projects, something to note is that some projects had just increased costs due to inflation, and to make sure that we could successfully complete the project, we had to increase the budget for the project. And we also included a lot of prospective grant funding through the federal government. So through the Biden administration and the infrastructure bill and some other opportunities, we have grants, we have applications for grants in where we're hoping to really leverage federal funds and bring them into advanced city priorities. So while not all those funds aren't all secured, but we are hopeful that many of them will be awarded in the upcoming years. And the final point and slide about the capital budget is looking at what are all the different funding sources for the capital budget. General obligation borrowing is secured by the city's property tax base, and that makes up a little over half of the budget. So of the $1.27 billion over the 6-year CIP, about $710 million of that is through money that the city would borrow and have to pay back. The other major sources of funds include intergovernmental funds, which include some of the federal grants that I mentioned, other sources such as tax increment district financing or impact fees, funds from reserves, or revenue bonds. So with that, I know that was a very quick overview, but I want to keep the presentation moving. So we're going to talk about the operating budget highlights. So for the next two sections, I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Christine. So as Christine said, we'll turn to the operating budget now and talk about the priorities in the budget. And there are three priority areas: safer communities, healthier neighborhoods, and opportunities for youth. We'll touch on in a little more detail some of the proposals in each of those areas, but this slide just highlights the city's CARES program, which is expanded and focused emergency response for mental health related issues, as well as continuing efforts on evidence-based approaches to violence prevention, and paired up with funding in the capital budget that Christine described in terms of securing federal dollars for reductions in accidents and injuries and deaths on our street, implements Vision Zero by adding staff to support that effort. In healthier neighborhoods, truly responds to the tremendous loss of reproductive rights recently for women and adds considerable investment in that area. It continues, as is highlighted in the capital budget, large expansion in funding for affordable housing, and adds a new affordability program for municipal services, for example, your water bill, and for low-income families and individuals. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then the Parks Alive program, which was started on a pilot basis in 2022, receives permanent funding and staffing for that, as well as funding for young adult employment opportunities. So in the Building Safer Communities area, I talked about the CARES program. That is expanded to 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, to really build on the success of this program that started as a pilot a couple of years ago and is expanded in each budget. And now this will cover every day of the week for a 12-hour period to really focus resources on that effort in a way that's helpful to individuals who may be in crisis. Violence prevention is continued, and as well as support for the Isthmus Safety Initiative that'll be grant funded and assisted by the city's Community Development Division. And then I did describe Vision Zero, and the budget proposes creating a project manager with the assumption that the city will receive considerable amount of federal aid for those types of efforts. And this will help get those projects moving as quickly as possible. Also, the city, the budget proposes a city emergency manager. This has been a part of many jobs and one person's job in the fire department for many years. And issues around emergencies have expanded recently, particularly related to weather issues and weather emergencies caused by climate change. Healthier neighborhoods and growing our healthier neighborhoods, making our neighborhoods better in that respect. There are no reductions in this budget, so services continue at current or expanded levels. I mentioned earlier the significant increase in investment in public health activities around reproductive health and their clinic and programs. And that's a partnership with the county through the joint county-city public health department. I mentioned earlier affordable housing, which is funded through the capital budget, as well as operating funding for really expanded roles that have been taken on concerning housing for homeless individuals and families. And then the municipal services bill, the MADCAP program, as it's called, to help low-income households, which is contingent upon approval by the State Public Service Commission and is currently before that body for approval, hopefully in the next couple of months. And then, of course, investments in youth are critical to our city's future. I mentioned earlier the Parks Alive program, and really this grew out of ideas and proposals from the city's ongoing neighborhood resource teams, and funding of about $160,000 is provided to fund a permanent program coordinator for this effort, as well as support costs to help create those events and sustain those events in city parks for all residents in Madison. And then also adds funding for young adult employment efforts that have begun with, have been invested in with city money over the last several years, has been expanded with federal American Rescue Plan Act. And this would put additional city funding in to continue those efforts and expanding those opportunities for young adults in Madison to move towards sustainable and family supporting employment. So those are the priorities. We'll turn now to some of the numbers in the budget. It's a budget at almost $382 million in what we call the general and library funds, and we focus on that because it funds most of what the city does. It is funded primarily from the property tax, which we'll touch on in a minute. The city budget does include other monies in addition to the general library fund. Those are focused in what we call our utilities, and those are primarily supported by user fees. So that might be the landfill remediation and monitoring program, our sewer utility, stormwater. We also receive federal money for community development, community services grants. We have what are called internal services activities, and those are things that sort of support efforts of our outward-facing city agencies. So, for example, our fleet services, our insurance fund, and workers' comp fund for our employees. TIF stands for tax increment financing. It primarily pays for capital investments in certain geographic areas of the city that have been identified for blight and for targeted economic development and other investments and other funding sources. So when we look at the general library fund and compare it to the 2022 adopted budget, it's a 6% increase, or about $21.6 million. When we look at 22 compared to the proposed 2023 budget, we'll talk a little bit in a few slides about what's called the levy limit, and that is a state mandated maximum amount of increase in property taxes that the city is allowed to proceed with. And the executive budget leaves about $415,000 of room between what's proposed in the executive budget and the maximum amount for additional council priorities and amendments beyond what's in the executive budget. The graph on this slide just gives you a sense of where those dollars, that $21.6 million is allocated, roughly a little less than half to one-time items. Those include a $2 million one-time seed investment to a endowment fund, a public-private endowment fund that would hopefully fund a large share of the cost to operate the homeless facilities that are being constructed or that have been put into place over the last few years. Another quarter of the budget pays for debt service, as Christine described earlier. That is basically the amount of money we have to pay back each year to repay the debt that we have issued to fund our capital programs. And then the rest of the budget is really employee pay increases, some of the program expansions that were mentioned earlier. And I will say that all of this is netted against a one-time reduction in the city's subsidy from the general fund to Metro Transit. And that is made possible by one-time federal economic recovery funding for transit. And this approach will help capture those dollars as quickly as possible and put them to use in our transit system. That money will have to be repaid in the 2024 budget or restored and repaid in the 2024 budget, as well as budgets after that. So when we talk about that $382 million, where does it go? This slide, the graph on this slide gives you a sense of those allocations, with most of the money going towards public safety and public health. That will be the city's fire and police departments, as well as the city's share of the joint city-county public health department. Also included there is the Police Civilian Oversight Board, as well as the Office of the Independent Monitor. The next largest category is that debt service that I described before, which represents about 16%. That's general fund debt service as a share of the general library fund budget. It's about 16%. And you'll see the next largest share is public works after that, which includes our park system, our streets division, which plows the streets and picks up trash and recycling, and also administrative agencies of the city, such as our information technology, finance department, human resources, and so on. The miscellaneous and direct appropriation to capital, which you see there, about $20 million. It's a large increase over the 2022 budget, and that's primarily because that's where we've put most of the funding for pay increases for employees over the next in 2023, which includes a $1,000 payment to all permanent employees, a 2% increase for all employees, as well as an additional 1% for what are called general municipal employees, trying to close a wage increase gap between that group and employees that are represented in labor unions. And when we look at the total operating costs, it's no surprise that the largest share is for personnel, and that's compensation, including salary and benefits for the city employees that provide all the services that we've been talking about before. So that's how the money is spent. How do we pay for those services? And in the general library fund, it really falls in three major areas. The largest being property taxes, which is a little over 70% of that revenue stream, followed by local revenues. And that includes what we call payment in lieu of taxes, which include payments from, for example, the water utility as a business entity pays something akin to a property tax, and that's about a little under $8 million a year. Fines and forfeitures, which include parking violations, for example, licenses and permits, with the largest category there being building permits, which have been increasing over the last few years and are expected to continue to increase with the amount of new construction occurring in the city. And then other local taxes also include the city's share of room taxes. 30% of room taxes come to the general fund. The other 70% under state law is allocated by the city's room tax commission for tourism marketing and support to Monona Terrace, the Overture Center, and the marketing efforts of Destination Madison. The next share of the funding pie that you see there is what we call intergovernmental revenues, which is almost completely made up of state aid, including what's called shared revenue. General transportation aids are also in that group, and the municipal services payment program that reimburses those cities around the state that have state-owned buildings located within their boundaries. So for Madison, that obviously, as the state capital, is going to be significant, as well as the home of the state's flagship campus of the University of Wisconsin system. Finally, the small share of the budget, about 1%, is from what we call fund balance, and that really reflects the a surplus in the life and wage insurance programs, about $3.4 million, that will be used to pay for that one-time $1,000 payment to all permanent employees. So one of the areas that is helping to balance the 2023 budget is a recovery in our local revenues. And I described what those are. So charges for services like our ambulance fees, the licenses and permits like our building permits and room taxes, as well as investment income, are up almost 15% or a little under $7 million from 2022 as projected to 2023. And that really reflects the strength of Madison's local economy and its continuing recovery from the economic effects of the pandemic. This growth excludes one-time funds that have been used, that were used in the 2022 budget from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, as well as one-time tax increment district surplus funding that is used in the 2023 budget. So that's the operating budget, and a little bit of background on both what is proposed in the 2023 executive budget, its priorities, as well as really high-level description of proposed expenditures and revenue sources. In this part, we'll turn to what does that mean in terms of the property tax effect, and what can the city do in terms of raising its property taxes, and then how does that translate into a tax on the average value home. So to start, there are some significant limitations on the city's budget. And as we mentioned earlier, we have almost 3/4 of the budget is supported by property taxes. And there are very few other revenue, sort of general revenue options under state law. So cities have almost no general options to turn to. In contrast, for example, to counties around the state that do have the option of levying a 0.5-cent sales tax, which Dane County does do. I think there's only less than a handful of counties around the state that do not levy that 0.5-cent sales tax. We've also seen that state aid has been a declining share of the budget for many years. And that trend has not changed. And that means that the property tax has to really kind of make up for that inability or inaction by the state in terms of additional support for cities. State law also limits that ability to grow property taxes as well as to grow increased spending. So on the property tax side, it has what are called levy limits, and that is tied to what we call net new construction, or the value of new buildings added in the city. On the expenditure side, it's more of a carrot approach where the state provides aid if spending is held below a certain rate of increase, which is tied to inflation and that net new construction factor. We also have to have a balanced budget, much like the state does, but in contrast to the federal government, which can deficit spend in the operating budget. And also that relationship of if the larger our capital budget, that money that's borrowed has to be repaid. And that means that it can translate into a larger share of the budget being of the operating budget paid for debt service. So the property tax rate is what dictates that amount of tax that will be paid by the individual property owner. When we look at the property tax levy in the proposed 2023 budget, it is increasing by 5.5%. And that's adding in the various factors that go into that levy limit calculation. And net new construction is stronger in 2023 than it was in 2022. And that reflects the amount of construction, both new construction and rehabilitation and so on, and that increased value from that. It also, the levy calculation also includes increases in debt service, which are not limited under the state law limit, but those have been going up, and we'll touch on that in a little more detail. We also have the other element of this is that assessed value of property in the city has gone up significantly. It's going up by 14%. That does include adding the value of property in the town of Madison that will be attached to the city at the end of this month. And that means that that property will then be in the city and taxed at the city's tax rate. That estimate for the 2023 budget of the assessed value is about $35.5 billion citywide, with the town of Madison being about 1% of that total. The mill rate, so that tax rate, which is the property tax levy amount divided by that assessed value, is actually decreasing because the levy is going up about 5.5%, but the value is going up 14%. So we get a decrease in the mill rate of about 7.5% to a rate of 7.69 mils, or if you express that in percentage, about 0.77% as a tax rate. So that's the tax rate calculation. That's what will be combined with tax rates of the other taxing jurisdictions in the city, and we'll touch on what those are in a couple of slides, and that will then result in the tax bill for each individual parcel in the city. So we are seeing strong growth in property taxes in 2023. I mentioned those numbers earlier in terms of 5.5%. And you can see the comparison of those factors in the graph on this slide. The net new construction being the blue part of each of those bars. And net new construction is up quite a bit compared to what it was for the 2022 budget. The red portion of the 2023 bar reflects that additional levy limit capacity that was added for bringing in all of the parcels from the town of Madison that will be attached to the city of Madison. And then the largest share of the increase is for debt service. And that reflects the increasing size of the city's capital budget. It reflects higher interest rates over the last few years or last few months that were reflected in the city's debt sale that occurred last month, as well as refunding or refinancing revenue bond debt that had been issued for water utility projects and issuing that as general obligation debt, which helps with the levy limit, and it also resulted in lower cost debt to the water utility. So when we look at the property tax levy over time, so looking back roughly 20 years, the average has been about 4.1%. So obviously the proposed levy is of 5.5% is above that average. And you can see that how that tracks over time, with the highest increase occurring in 2009 over this period of time. As I mentioned earlier, the assessed value, so that value that can be taxed in the city, is $35.5 billion. When the assessor takes those numbers and looks at the number of single family homes or residential type units in the city, owned units, that is, owner occupied, that average value home has increased by over 12%. So it's 335,000 in 2022 and is almost 377,000 in 2023. So a majority of the property in the city is residential property, a little less than 2/3. And most of the remainder is commercial property. That does include some larger multifamily units or multifamily buildings. And then the remainder, which is a very small share of the taxable value, is manufacturing, agriculture, and personal property that can be taxed. So when we look not only at the total property tax levy, we take that calculated tax rate, the mill rate, and if we apply that to the average home value amount, so in the case of 2023, it's that $376,900. We get what's called a tax on the average value home. And this graph shows what that percent change has been year over year over the past 20 years. The average has been about 3.6% over that period of time. And the increase proposed for the 2023 budget is slightly under 4%, 3.98%. So slightly above that average of 3.6%. You can see where those maximums have been in both 2011 as well as in 2005. And then just a reminder that when we're talking about the city budget, the city property tax levy, the tax on the average value home, the tax rate, that is one portion of the total tax bill that is received by a property owner located within the city of Madison. As you can see on that pie chart, it's a little more than a third of the total tax bill, with the largest share of the bill going to one of the school districts that's located within the city of Madison's limits. The largest school district being the Madison Metropolitan School District. There are, I think, 6 other school districts that have taxing authority within some small part of the city, primarily on the periphery of the city. And so all that comes together in addition to the property tax levy of the county and Madison College as well to make up that total tax bill. And those other 3 taxing jurisdictions are setting their budgets, with the school district in particular waiting for final school aid numbers from the state to determine its levy amount in December. And I think that summarizes everything. Christine, I'll turn it back over to you to take us through any questions we might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. So we did set this up as a webinar so that participants could ask questions. I see right now we only have staff and alders. So we will open it up for alders to ask questions if you would like. But if you're a member of the public who's watching this through streaming or watching the recording, you're always welcome to ask questions in writing. You can email citybudget@cityofmadison.com. We'll try to compile any questions from the session and attach it as an FAQ to a link to the recording. We're also doing a repeat of this session on October 24th. So you can spread the word, come back again as a participant so you can ask a question live. I'm going to leave this up for just a minute so that you can take down the email address, citybudget@cityofmadison.com, if you want to write in the questions. All right, so we had this webinar scheduled till 7, so I do want to leave a minute to see if any of the alders would like to chime in with questions or comments or any reactions after going through that presentation. All right, seeing no questions, then I think we are going to end a little early tonight. Again, please, Alder Miadze, please.
I just want to echo in. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out and giving this very thorough presentation, and also too, just to say, good night to everybody, and thank you for all that tuned into the budget. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Alder Miadze. And Alder Miadze was one of the folks who reached out to us early in the year to try and get us to do some more community engagement. So I really appreciate you being proactive and encouraging this sort of information session. And Again, we'll do a repeat on the 24th, and we hope to continue building on this public engagement. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us. And for those of you who are watching at home, have a great night, and we'll see you at the Finance Committee budget hearings on the 17th. Goodbye.